All right, folks. Well, it's about time for our next speaker here. And this is going to be a real treat for you. Chuck Carlson from We Hold These Truths has been over to Israel, has been over to the Gaza Strip. So you're not going to be getting a second-hand description here. You're going to get a first-hand description of what's going on over there, what's happening. And he's also headed up Project Straight Gate, which is basically, and he'll tell you about this, going to the churches. If you're supporting Christianity, then you've got to be against murder, you've got to be against war. Why are you supporting the war-owned Iraq? Let's bring up and welcome Chuck Carlson. We hold these truths.
Now, I'm going to teach something today, and what I have to say that's new to teach you is about the problem of the churches, and that's really what I have to say that others don't. There are a lot of other people that have been to Gaza. I have people contacting me all the time now who've just come back. And I'm not the only one, and you can get lots of information on it. I'm going to show you a little film footage about my trip, and it's going to be a way to shortcut through a lot of it because I want to get into what you can do about this and the practical applications of what we know and what we've learned. There are two films about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip that are absolutely tremendous. One is this one called Gaza Strip. This film shows something I'd never seen before. It shows the results of a poison gas, a bombing of the Palestinians by the Israelis. Some of you may have just heard about this. There's recently been some exposure about it. It happened almost exactly 2 years ago. And the author of this film, the man who made this film, happened to be there during that 3 weeks or 4 weeks when that took place, and he happened to be in the hospital and filmed the results of this incredible event, this gassing, a horrible gassing of these people, many of them children, many of them kids. You'll see the kids and you see the results of it. Some of them are still, this gas was not intended to kill them, it was intended to torture them. It was a torment gas. And some of them today are still in hospitals. No one knows exactly what the gas is, but it's in this film, the Gaza Strip. I'd never seen it before. I had heard about it. The other film which we sell both of these, is called People in the Land, and it's about the West Bank, and it's the best overall piece of film footage about Palestine and Israel that you can find. We've sold an awful lot of them. It was made for Public Broadcasting Corporation, and then after they made it, they would not show it. It was shown on only 11 stations. And Tom Hayes, who made this film himself in a trip something like mine, only he was a professional photographer, he stayed a lot longer, and that film covers the overall problem. It covers the financing of Israel by America. It covers how Americans are financing Israel and how we're financing the war and how we're paying for the weapons, probably for the poison gas, for the gas against the kids, probably paid for that. That's covered. It talks about AIPAC, the organization through whom our Congress is largely controlled. Congress is largely controlled by an Israeli organization called AIPAC. AIPAC gets funding directly from Israel, but of course Israel gets the funding from us in foreign aid. They're currently trying for another $15 billion. This film kind of puts that into perspective. It talks about the $91 billion that you've given Israel to produce things like buy guns and tanks from us and to produce their own poison gases. I guess they're their own. We recently were mentioned, or we were actually featured on the front cover of the New Times, which most of you may have seen. We have copies of that out there at our table. And if you don't have this, it's pretty good. The story is pretty good. It's 7 pages long, and it's a very unique story. And the reason the story is good is that they became very interested in what we were doing at the churches. And since we started doing that, we've had publicity from all 5 TV networks. They've all been out to see what we do. Everyone has reported on it. You can go to our website, this one, WTT.org, and you can see the Channel 5 piece that they did on our so-called demonstration. We call them vigils at the church, at a church. And I want to tell you that this is the thing I want to talk to you about today. That's where I'm going to spend the time, rather than spending a lot of time on my trip to Gaza and to the West Bank, which was very brief. I spent almost all of my time in Gaza. I did travel around Israel, and I'll be happy to take extensive questions or whatever questions you have afterwards, or take them privately if you want to know more about how to go there and what to do. I want to just make about 3 points about that before I move on to our effort on the churches. And I'm going to tell you, these are statements. First of all, when you hear about the Gaza Strip, what you are hearing about is a prison. It is a gulag, such as Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about in Russia, where they took political prisoners and squeezed them into a compound and then guarded them and kept them in there. It was a gulag. The Gaza Strip is a gulag. Nobody comes or nobody goes. I'll show you that. The people inside are absolutely imprisoned there. They have to try to make their living there. They have to try to farm there. They have to raise their families there. They have to try to get by in every way there in a piece of land that is about as big as Tucson. And there are 1,300,000 or 1,250,000 Palestinians living in that little piece of land, which is no bigger than it's about 70 square miles. I think maybe that's about the size of Tucson if you just took the borders of it. But they have to also raise their crops there. The grapes have to be raised there. The figs that they eat, the plants, everything they grow has to be grown there. Unless Israel lets them bring something in, there is nothing there except what they can produce themselves. So imagine that many people in a little area like that trying to farm it, milk the cow there, and feed the animals. They have all these animals. Their transportation is largely animals. All that has to be done within that little area, unless, of course, Israel gets benevolent and generous and lets some of their Israeli businessmen sell something to the Gazans, and they do it all the time because Israel's going broke. Israel is in the process of bankruptcy right now. It would collapse next month if they don't get this $15 billion from the United States in additional foreign aid, in addition to what they've received already this year. The weapons, everything that they use on the Israeli side comes from the U.S. The Palestinians have nothing. They have nothing to fight back with. You've heard all of this. This is not new to most of you, but I hope you'll believe it because it is an absolute fact. I did a careful study on the so-called body bombers, the suicide bombers, and as Mr. Douglas pointed out, what would a 17-year-old kid want to kill himself for? Well, of course they don't. They don't want to kill themselves because they're Muslim. It's not in their culture to kill themselves. They're a life culture. The reason they do it is because they have been raised in a desperate circumstances, and they have seen their families killed and bombed. They've seen their parents abused, and sometimes right in front of them. Sometimes right in their homes, indescribable things that are done in their homes by invading Israeli officers and soldiers. One of these, this film, The People in the Land, shows that very clearly. It shows a midnight raid where the Israelis come into a Palestinian community and decide to collect the electric bill. They have to pay Israel for the electric bill. They decide to collect the electric bill at midnight, and they go door to door, pounding on these dark doors, and they drag the door open, and in the soldiers go with the weapons and guns, and terrifying the family at midnight, collecting the bills. The photographer would have probably lost his life. He certainly would have lost his camera. And he told me that the families that put him up, that let him photograph out the window as their neighbors had their utilities collected at midnight, the father would have certainly been drug away, maybe never seen again, if they would have ever found that they were photographing out the window. You'll see that if you get this film. I didn't see a lot of things like that, but I'll show you a few things just to give you an idea of this. Now, what is this all about? What does Palestine and Israel have to do with the churches? That's what our story is really all about. First of all, you've heard today that you've heard today from others, that our money is, of course, controlled by a powerful clique, an elite that has control of this thing called the Federal Reserve Bank, and they control our money supply. There is a political control over our money supply, right? There is a political control over our media. Our media, everybody knows this. If I'm telling you something you didn't know, gee, come see me afterwards. When I was in Cairo, the night before I went into Gaza, tried to get into Gaza, the night before I went in, I woke in the morning early, real early, and CNN is playing over the CNN Worldwide in English in Cairo, Egypt, in my hotel room. And all the Arabic stations have the same story on. And what's the story? The Israelis bombed an ambulance. The doctor in the ambulance was 57 years old. He was killed. The driver was killed. The aides were killed. Everybody in it was killed. They were on their way to pick up patients who had been bombed the night before by the Israelis. And on the way, they were stopped at a checkpoint, and the Israeli account of this said that they were speeding, so they shot them. They were going too fast with the ambulance. In fact, later it was determined that they weren't shot by a tank. They were stopped. And the Israeli soldier took his shoulder-held grenade launcher, and he aimed it right in the window from point-blank range, like you and me, and he shot a grenade into this ambulance, and there it was in CNN News smoking the next morning at 6 a.m. their time. Okay? I called my daughter, who has CNN on the dish, and I said, please, record everything today. Everything. Put a couple in, make sure you don't let it run out. I want to have that. I want to have that when I get home. Guess what? It never played. It never played. I couldn't figure it out how they could possibly bury it. The same CNN worldwide. In Cairo, it's there. The smoking ambulance, the story. Here it's not there. You know where it played? A man in Honolulu saw it late at night, the following night. CNN played it all right, but they held it over so late that you were all in bed. You had to live in Hawaii and be a night owl to have seen it, you see. So if you were up at 11 o'clock watching CNN disc in Honolulu, you would see that, and it was doctored up to make it look like the Palestinians were really at fault. It's something in there, something about they were carrying explosives or something like that. Something that they concocted. They changed the story, you see. The original story stayed, but they changed that one. Now, that's how your press is done. Now, that's why you don't know much about what goes on in Gaza and Palestine, because you have to watch CNN at midnight or 2 in the morning, I suppose, to see it. But it's all there on the internet. So I'm assuming you all use the internet and that you can get these accounts and that you see these things. And if you don't, you should. If you want to know, you've got to get your news off the internet and read all these other sources. Read some Arab sources, read some Israeli sources. Now, I'm going to tell you another story, and then we're going to leave this. When I went there, one of the things I was really interested in was why the suicide bombers always bomb buses. That bothered me. You hear it, they're always bombing buses. And I thought, why do they bomb buses? Why don't they find a soldier to bomb? If the guy is going to strap on a bomb, and the only way they have by the way, they only started doing this when they found out they couldn't possibly hit anybody unless they carried the bombs, because they don't have any way to detonate these crude devices they make except with a little thumb thing and a flashlight battery. That's how they do it. They don't have a detonator or a proximity fuse or a rocket to shoot it in. You see, all they have is their body. But my question was, I understood that. I understood Nathan Hale as suicide missions. We all understand life-giving heroism, don't we? We all know what that means. We all know what it means to go on impossible missions. We've read the stories. So shouldn't surprise us that Palestinians in a prison trying to break out would do that. But now we wonder why the soldiers. Well, I went into Israel through a place called Taba, which is way down south on the Red Sea. And then I took a 350-kilometer bus ride up to Tel Aviv. And when I got on the bus, guess who was on with me? Soldiers with weapons. You see, in Israel, all the buses are full of soldiers because Israel has everybody in the army. There's 200,000 people in that little country serving, men and women. And by the way, they never tell you this either, the girls are with the boys, 18 years old, 19 years old. I think 19, they're all in. The girls only serve 18 months, the boys serve 3 years. There's only a 1/3 girls, that's the statistic, and that's how it works out. When you get in the bus, the soldier with the carbine over her shoulder, standing right beside you in the aisle, is 1/3 of the time they're girls. Drafted girls, and 2/3 of the time it's drafted boys. And they're all together. They get on together, they get off together, at night they're together. You see them if you go out at night, which I did. So, as I rode north through the desert, I suddenly realized, my God, I'm riding on a military target. I've already answered my question. That's why they bomb buses. That's where you find a concentration of military. You see, a Palestinian bomber has no chance of getting you next to an airplane or a fortified Israeli position because the weapons and armaments are so incredibly sophisticated and there's so much of it, so much armaments. So what does the guy do? He finds a cluster of Israeli soldiers, and the best place is if they can get on a bus. And if they get on the bus and they wait patiently, pretty soon they'll have a whole bunch of these people around them. Now, the Israeli media handles it this way. They got a thing called the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the propaganda arm for the government. So whenever there's a bombing, here's what they say. 12 Israelis were killed today in a bombing by a suicide bomber. Okay, then later in the day they issue a new release, and that second release has their names. The American press picks up the first release, and they assume that all 12 are civilians. And so the American press usually translates that. 12 innocent Israeli civilians killed in a dastardly bombing attack by a Palestinian 19-year-old. That's what you read. So later the Israeli media gets a report on who's killed, and if you go and read that, as I do, if you go and read that, you'll find out that the 12 people were probably half military and half civilian, or more. In some cases, almost entirely military. One of the recent raids reported that 20 or 19 Israelis had been killed in a bombing. It turned out 18 of the 20 were soldiers. There were only 2 civilians on the bus. It was a military bus. They blew up a military bus. Now, what do you call that? Is that an act of terrorism, of wanton, vicious terrorism against women and children? Not really. Not really. It's called, in our service, when we were trained, when I was in, it's a standard thing. It's search and destroy, right? Search and destroy missions are where you go out, you find them, and you destroy them. That's what they call it. So I answered my question by riding 4 buses, and they all had at least 25% military at all times. Some of them almost entirely military. That's what's there. There's also no business there. So the tourists don't ride the buses, and there's very little business in Israel right now, and they are going down the tubes. They're not even picking the oranges off the trees. At least they didn't last March. They were still hanging there. They didn't have any labor to pick the oranges because all the labor was in the military carrying guns. I'm going to show you just a little bit of this, then just a few things, and you'll have to forgive my photography, but I had really primitive equipment, and I'm not a photographer anyway and don't want to be, but I have a few things that will help you to understand a little bit about what Gaza looks like. And this is me trekking across Egypt in the direction of Gaza, just as Abraham did. I didn't get that far on the camel. Now, this is the first picture I dared take in Israel. I'd already gotten into Gaza, and they tell you not to take pictures. And this was an illegal picture. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking a picture back at what the Palestinian sees if he tries to get out of the Gaza Strip. And he's looking, and here's a guard tower, and that thing is fortified. It's got a little cube hole in it. And there's a guy looking out through a little hole about that big, and then there's guns looking out through other holes. And when you want to go out, you walk up to one of those little corridors there at the side, and you stand at the line with your toes in the line until he summons you over, and then you go through your passport and everything. Now, the interesting thing I want you to note here is that this is the only way into Gaza, and how many people do you see in the picture right there? Do you see any people? There aren't any. I'll show you another picture. This is looking the same way from further away. See that gate back there? And the guard shack on the left? How many people do you see? Nobody. There was nobody in line in front of me. There was nobody in line behind me. I had my little backpack. I carried my bag in, pulling it on the wheels. I had to ask the soldiers, where do I go next? There was no one to follow. You know, when you're in the airport, you get in line, don't you? You go behind, queue up. Nobody to queue behind because they don't let anybody in. And nobody's coming out. There was absolutely nobody during the 20 minutes, and there's 1,300,000 people, and that is the only way in or out during that time. Nothing else there. Here is a picture of the Gaza Strip. I only want to show you how narrow it is. Across there, at the narrowest part, it's less than 3 miles. The widest part, it's maybe 5 miles. And if you look at the white part along the sea, that's the Mediterranean. Down toward the bottom, that's Egypt in the green. And you see a white strip around the outside between Egypt and Gaza, and that means that the Israelis occupy that. This is an official Israeli map that I got my hands on while I was there. And the white area along the sea, just above the Egyptian border, you see that white area? The Israelis say they control that. And that's why they put it a different color. You see, that's called settlements. That's the people that have been brought in to occupy pieces of the Gaza Strip that used to be the Palestinians. And a Palestinian cannot go in the white area. So what they've done is they've put settlements on all the wells, put armed outposts on them, and then they've connected them by a road, and they've created a zone that is a no-walk zone. That means if you're a Palestinian, you walk in there, you're going to get shot. That's what that means. That's what the map means. And up at the top, the gray area toward the top, is the big city called Gaza City. I'll show you a little bit of that. It's what used to be a modern city, and about where the little red map coming in is where I stayed. The whole thing there, 20 miles long, 3 to 4 miles wide. That comes out to be 80 square miles. Not much space. Here's a little back shot at the wall again. Now, I'm now inside, and I want you to know that this is how the Palestinians in Gaza live. They farm, they raise stuff, they bring it to market, they eat it, and they feed their donkeys, and that's their transportation. There's very few tractors or anything, because it's just a poor place. I mean, they're operating in a prison with what they can do. This is a camp, and the wall says Jabalia. It's a famous refugee camp. A refugee camp is a place where Palestinians were forced to go 54 years ago when they were driven out of their hometowns, such as the towns all around the Gaza Strip. The Israelis took those towns, drove them out at rifle point. They were forced to go into Gaza or into someplace in the West Bank, and there the United Nations gave them a little patch of ground, about a little bigger than a stage, and that was theirs, and they were allowed to build on it or put up a tent, and that's where they've lived ever since. Of the people in the Gaza Strip, 600,000 live that way. They're displaced persons forced in there by the Israelis, and some of them are still in tents because some of their houses have been blown down. And those tenements that you see back there probably hold about 4 families per floor. They have an average of 300 square feet. The little first Palestinian boy I saw, and you see the orchard behind him, and there was a tank trap there where a tank had come in the night before. This is a English class where I spoke to them at the university. There's a university in Gaza City. And I was invited to talk to the English class. I talked to them half the time, they talked to me half the time. And I'm going to share with you a couple of things that went on there. This is the teacher. She is an English woman, American woman, who lives there. She's lived there for 6 years. She's a Christian, and she belongs to a Baptist church there. And in fact, she's on the board of a Baptist church there. And I'll show you the church in a minute. The kids are all Arab kids. This beautiful little girl is 16 years old. She was extremely smart. I've recorded everything these kids said. The things they said was wonderful. Their knowledge of world politics was very good. And they had a question for you. They said, now that you know about this, what are you going to do about it? That was their question for you. Well, now that you know about this, what are you going to do about it? What they really wondered is, how can it be that America, with a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution, can allow this to happen? That's what this boy asked. With your Declaration of Independence, which he knew all about, how can you allow this to happen where you pay for the Israelis to bomb us every night? That's basically his question. And they all asked about the same thing. This is Shireen. Her English is great. We have a 12-minute film we took of what she had to say, and at the end, Shireen, and I'm not going to play that. I'm not going to. It's just takes too much time to play it. But her English is very good, and if you really want to hear it, it's very touching. And at the end, my guide said, "What do you really want to tell Mr. Carlson? He's here to know. He wants to know really how you feel in your heart." And she thought a little bit, and she said, "Well, now that you're here, now that you know, would you go back and fix it? Would you just go back and fix it?" She said, "Would you go back and fix it now that you know?" And this building in the background right behind her, you're going to see that in a minute. That night, I stayed in that building, and she was brought over there for the interview. And the next morning, I got up on the roof, and there was a missile raid. This is my Arab guide. He married a Finland, a Christian girl from Finland. He's now in Finland. Excellent. And from the roof of my building, a Christian cemetery. Did you know there are Christians in Gaza and Christian cemeteries? Well, yes, there are. And more of it. This is the appearance at night. I'll show you the missile raid in just a minute. Now, you're going to have to squeeze the missile raid in between here because this is the next morning. And there was a funeral the next morning for the Palestinians that died in the missile raid I'm about to show you. Four died, 30 were wounded. And every weapon was American. And when I went out in the street that morning, my friend Ahmed, my guide, said, "Chuck, you're going out alone. I want to cut that little symbol off your backpack." It had a little Jan's pack on this in English. And he said, "You know, you Americans furnished the weapons to kill those people last night. I think with you carrying that up, it would be better if we just took that off." And he took his blade and he cut off that little Jan's pack thing and we threw it away. And this little boy was in the funeral procession. He stopped to talk to me. He didn't speak English, but he knew I was American, and we had a little talk about what it was like to be a kid there. These are the boys marching the funeral parade in the streets, the women in a different parade. Not good pictures because it's all done with a little VCR camera. The beach, just below Arafat's house, and up to the right, some shacks, that you'd call them shacks. This is another camp. It's called the beach camp. I interviewed people that lived there, had businesses in there, worked there, raised families there. I want to tell you, 300 square feet. I want you to think a minute how big 300 square feet is. A home, 300 square feet, the whole thing. That's why they're in compounds together, why they share the walls, you see, and they use every bit of inch they have, and then they build these homes themselves in these camps. And in that place you're looking at there may have been 8 kids. There's kids everywhere. The average family is about 7, including the mom and dad. Some of them are more. I interviewed a dad who told me through his friend that he had 23 children. His friend had only 7. He said, "I don't think I could live in America." He said, I'm told that they won't let you have a big family in America. And I said, no, that's not true. We can have it, but we do have abortion there. So they said, "Well, what's that?" And so I explained it, and they had a hard time understanding what abortion was. I mean, they really did not understand what I was saying. I think they didn't believe me. I think it was the one thing I told them that they did not believe that America does it, because they have none there. And you see one little guy is sitting on his soccer ball. They play ball in the streets. Now these buildings show what kind of places they live in. The one on the right has a tent or has a roof. The family probably took the tent. When they built the walls, they didn't have the money for tin to put on a roof, so they used the tent for the roof, and they're still using it. The one on the left has a tin roof. And you may have, and that's a street between them. There's a little boy that was shot. He's on crutches. I was very embarrassed to take his picture. His mom didn't like it. She saw me, and they're very embarrassed to be photographed, and so you don't take many pictures. Graffiti on the walls, and this graffiti was on the wall of the Baptist, graffiti like this was on the wall of the Baptist church. It's graffiti against the state of Israel. Yasser Arafat's headquarters. Congressman Salmon went there. He was there about 4 years ago. He told me about it. He said when he went in, he didn't walk in carrying his backpack. They brought him in officially. So they put him in an armored personnel carrier with walls that thick. And I said, did you see the Palestinians? He said, well, no, but I was protected. You see, I was protected. They hauled him all the way through everything and took him in there and inside this big gates and dumped him out in the back and then took him in for his meeting with Yasser Arafat in this building. And he never saw a thing because he was covered up by his own government when he went in. And that's the way they went in. It makes a big difference whether you walk in yourself carrying your pack. Municipal building, just a nice building, but this one is not so nice. Now, I told you about the destruction of ambulances. The Israelis destroy the infrastructure. This was a prison. In Gaza, with 1 million people, they have to have a prison. You got to have some place to put malefactors. So the Israelis destroyed it for them, so they don't have a prison anymore. You wouldn't think about that, would you? But they destroy the prison so that the criminals have to be turned loose. This is a new building some Gazan is building. Strangely enough, they built them. And this is the most interesting one because your Baptist church would not admit there's a Baptist church there, but there is. It says Baptist Church. It's an old mosque that was converted. It says Baptist Church in Arabic on the left side, and there's anti-Israeli graffiti on the front of the walls. And I interviewed the people there, and the school where they sent their children was destroyed by F-16s the week before I came. They had a private school. They sent their kids there. Arab kids went there, English kids went there, the few that were there. Muslim kids and Christian kids together went there if their parents could afford it. And it was a pretty good-sized building. I may even have a picture of it. And the Israelis used 2 of your F-16s rockets to destroy it. They completely destroyed it, and families were looking for another place to put their kids. Now, in Palestine, the parents take great pride in the education of the kid. I interviewed a businessman, and he'd converted his little home, that little 300-foot home, into a business, and then he was able to get out of there, and he was a tailor, and he has family somewhere else, and he was able to, and he told me that he'd managed to get all his kids through high school, and he was very proud of that. They're extremely conscious of education. The kids all go to school if the schools aren't destroyed. This is an ambulance that was destroyed by an American not F-16, by American Apache helicopter with Hellcat missiles, just like the one the doctor was in that I saw the night before. Only, you see, there's lots of them. The Israelis destroy infrastructure, and that means the ambulances. There are statistics there for how many babies are born at checkpoints. A woman who's pregnant can figure out what the odds are of having her baby die at a checkpoint while she waits 3 or 4 hours for the Israelis to let the ambulance through to the hospital. There's statistics, how many of them they know. They keep the numbers. It's a risk of being pregnant over there, that you'll die in the ambulance on the way to the hospital if you have to have help. Most of the babies are born right at home. You can imagine why. Nobody wants to get in the ambulance. There were some professionals I talked to, like this man who did the programs. Now I'm going to go ahead just a little further here because we have to skip ahead, and this is, I'm going to show you just very briefly a Project Straight Gate. This is a big Baptist church in Phoenix. This is what we do, and then in a minute I'm going to explain to you why we do it. There's 5 or 6 people in the room that have participated in these. We go to churches. We've been to about 12 churches so far, and we basically go to the churches and challenge the church. What is your position on the war? Why aren't you taking a position opposing the war? Where do you stand on that? And I'll get into that a little bit. Choose life, not war. I'll get into this a little bit more. Iraq, what would Jesus do? That sign is being held by a 15-year-old kid. Our best help comes from kids who are 15, 14, 12, 10-year-old girl the other day. Great help. Motivated kids who can do things. Iraq, what would Jesus do? Thou shalt not kill. And he's being interviewed by Channel 10 there. See the camera, or see the microphone? He's at a rally we did, and he's being interviewed, and the microphone's in front of him. And that's the end of this. Now, I'll switch this off, and then I have, in a minute, just a little short thing to show you what it's like to sleep in Gaza at 3 a.m. and have a missile raid come over and come upon you. And then we're going to get into the meat of this, exactly, and I'm going to teach you something. Then we're going to get into teaching you something that you probably don't already know. Now, just tell me when you're ready to go there. What we have here is a controlled church. America has a controlled church. The movement to control the Federal Reserve Bank, to control your money, was only part of it, you see. The movement to control your lives was only part of it. The war effort is, of course, a movement to control you, because nobody ever bucks the government when you're in war, do they? It becomes criminal. And you have things like the Patriot Act that says, if there's a war, then you've got to go along with politicians, right? Okay, now, these are movements we know about. We're in a situation of perpetual war. Okay, now I'm going to show you the strip, and then we'll get into that. This is a photograph from my rooftop, and go ahead and play it. What you'll hear, the first sound you hear will be Apache helicopters. Hear them? Hear that?
Maybe 2 miles over there.
That's Apaches, made here in Mesa. Hear that? That's a Hellcat rocket. Hellcat, they call them.
See,
Watch the explosion.
plane has got to be right up there.
I'm trying to find him. It's dark. You'll see the flashes in the upper left, though.
Never seen anything like it. Most horrible thing I can imagine. Here comes another one.
See the rocket?
Much lower angle, right off to my left. Behind the tree, now coming out from the tree.
That's the report when they fire it.
Report, and it's touchdown right there.
There's your explosion. You'll hear that in 7 seconds.
Now we'll hear the report.
I don't know how many of them are up there.
Only 7 seconds for that report. That's landing not much more than a mile from us. This one fired right over our head.
Hear that? That's when they let it go.
First concussion is when the thing is fired. That was
See it come down?
at least almost directly over our heads.
They guide them in. They never miss. They guide them in. It goes right to the car they're aiming at. They could hit your bedroom.
1002, 1003.
Anybody tells you they couldn't take out Saddam Hussein? That would take out Saddam Hussein. If they really wanted to kill Saddam Hussein, they could get him with an F-16 or one of these. Saddam Hussein.
Fired right overhead. This plane is
That's just a report when it comes out of the
down there. Dropping them down there. There's another one coming down into that area. What are they killing a mile away over there? It's only 7 seconds for the sound of the explosion to reach us. So that's a very small time. It takes about 5 seconds for...
That's what it sounds like.
That's in the area I walk around all the time, I think. I don't know, that almost looks like a downtown area of Gaza. Very close. Those guys are still up there. This is the great state of Israel firing American weapons.
There's a little bit more. There's just a little more.
You'll never hear them any closer unless they're after you.
They were just parked right over me. That's 3,000 feet away.
This
But
film's about to run out. We've been up here for about 14 minutes.
now notice there's no firing back. Nobody's shooting at those Apaches either. You haven't heard any anti-aircraft batteries, haven't seen any flashes in the sky.
Cannot be more than
There's no firing back.
1,500 feet high, maybe. And
Because the Palestinians have nothing to shoot back with. They have no weapons, nothing but maybe rifles.
a few seconds away, so this is shutting down. There comes another missile coming down. They just don't quit. There it comes. There's the explosion. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds to reach 12.
Yeah. One last one, I think. This one, you can see this one come out of the Apache if you watch closely. It's in the upper left. It'll be way up in the upper left. That's just a light. You'll see a bright flash as it comes out.
Go home, guys.
That's it. Okay. Okay, so nobody has a right to say they don't know. There's nobody who wants to know who doesn't know. There's no excuses. And yet, today we have a form of racism in our churches that essentially is nothing more than anti-Islamic or anti-Arab children, or whatever you want to call it. It's nothing more than radical racism that has permeated a large number of the churches in America to the point where they actually stand for the war. When Jerry Falwell when the question of the resolution, the Clinton resolution, was in doubt, Pat Robertson's Jay Sekulow went on national radio and television, and he said that he raised 100,000 letters and calls from Christians demanding that the congressman approve the war upon Iraq. Same party, or Jerry Falwell, has stated on national television that there are approximately, I think he said 77 million Christians in America who call themselves Christians, who basically will back anything that Israel does. And the leadership of the 700 Club, Pat Robertson, and of more importantly, the Southern Baptist Convention has basically said that the Gaza people have to leave. And we have a paper on this, and we go into great detail on this, and you can get that paper. It's called The Source of Our War Problems, Why Judeo-Christians Do Not Demand Peace. In it, it brings you the words of people like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, who have said that the people of Gaza have no rights, and therefore they're trespassers on the property they're in, even though they've always been there, and that they have to leave, and that if they have to go into Egypt or into the sea or wherever, he doesn't care. He simply says that it's not their land, they have to get out. So you now have a large part of the so-called Christian right that is supporting the Israel in every way. And we have two lengthy papers that go into great detail on this. One is called Sherry's War. Sherry is a lady in a church who absolutely believes this. She absolutely believes that there is no wrong that an Israeli can do. She believes they're God's chosen people, and that anything they do, therefore, is God's will, and that no matter what they do to a Palestinian, she just says, well, God's will works in strange ways. That's the way her to respond to this. Sherry believes that no matter what is done to the Palestinians, it's God's will. And the reason she believes that is that her pastor believes that. We've gone to their church with our signs, and we've stood out there, and we've had people come out and talk to us, and they readily tell us that. They tell us that they teach in that church that the Israelis are God's chosen people, and that anything the Israelis do is necessary to carry out God's mandates. That's what they say. Now, the people in the Christian churches who say this all know that the war against Iraq is part of Israeli foreign policy. They know because Ariel Sharon has told them so. He said, we want, and they say it over and over again publicly, that we want Saddam Hussein and we want Iraq bombed. That's what they say over and over again. And all of anyone who goes to a church where they teach this doctrine. And by the way, I should share with you that I'm a Southern Baptist deacon. And the way this got started with me was in 1990 when we did the first war against Iraq, the so-called war, which was really the annihilation of 150,000 Iraqis. It wasn't a war at all. It was a push-button annihilation like you just saw. I wrote a paper at that time, and that paper was written to fellow members of the Southern Baptist Convention and to my fellow deacon board in my church. And I said, may God forgive us, this is the end, may God forgive us if by our inactivity we allow genocide against the Muslim women and children and the sacrifice of any of our own children. The paper is still circulated. You can pick up a copy out here. It's entitled, Let Me Speak Boldly to Fellow Believers. And we haven't changed a word of it. We've just added an introduction to explain this and a postscript to the end of it to kind of update it for the things that have happened. You see, nothing has changed. It's still Mr. Bush, and it's still Mr. Bush's war. But in 1990, when I wrote the paper, I wrote it to the church because I said that Christians are being taken in by the war scheme based on the erroneous idea that believers are yoked to the modern Zionist nation of Israel. And the theory, it goes, since Muslims are considered enemies of Israel, everything we or the Israelis do to Muslims, no matter how cruel or inhuman, is not only okay, but it is in some way inexplicably God's will. Now, I didn't write those words this morning. I wrote them on Christmas, the day after Christmas in 1990. And I also pointed out that the war would be expensive. Now, some of you probably know about this, and Mr. Bennett has said that when you appeal to people, no matter how your heart is, no matter what your beliefs is, and no matter how passionately you feel about something, you've still got to make it make sense to them. And we now find out that there are 160,000 people, Americans, who were in the Gulf War who are now receiving pensions because they got Gulf War illness, whatever that is. And whether they have it or not, I don't know. 160,000 is a long line, and if they only get $100 a month, that's $161 million a year, just for the people who were in the Gulf War, who said that they were disabled during the Gulf War, and we now have to pay them that for the rest of their lives because they have been given a disability. I'm not saying they earned it, they should have had it, or they shouldn't have it. I'm saying that when we said the war would have a cost to us, it did. It was not free. Even though we lost only 147 people, we lost our morality, and we also had the result of it that we're now paying for financially. The cost of war is bankrupting our country. You can tell people that. The reason our dollar is down 25% against the euro in 1 year. 1 year. If you would have taken your dollars and told your banker, please put them into a euro account. I think I'll just, instead of having a dollar account, give me a euro account. Does it cost anything? 2%? Whatever, 1%? You could have converted and you would have 25% more money than you have now, because the dollar has lost that much against the euro. It's lost almost that much against every other major currency. This is during our president's demand for war. You see, war has a cost, and the world community knows that if we're going to do this, that they really just don't want to finance all this war. So the dollar is suffering in every market. You saw Desmond Tutu and former President Nelson Mandela sounding off. By the way, the South African rand is up 35% in the last year against the dollar. 35%. Now that should tell you something about your money. Is war free? No. You may think it's free, but look at what's happening to the dollar, you see? Look what's happening to the inflation. You've now got this enormous inflation coming where we're talking about maybe $1 trillion deficit if the war comes off, and less if it doesn't. They're talking up to they're talking 300, they admit 300 billion, and Warren Rudman said it's got to be between $500 billion and $1 trillion. He said that on TV the other night. So there are other costs for you to talk to people about besides the real issue, and the real issue is morality. The morality of killing other people. Now, I want to tell you that there is nothing in the New Testament. I give talks all over. I just came back from Michigan. I went to 3 universities in Colorado, including Regis College, and they put on a luncheon for me, a bag luncheon for the faculty members. They invited them all. There were two department heads and a lot of faculty members there, and we did this program, and we took 3 hours to do it. So it was very detailed, and they stayed. And I did it at 3 universities and went through all of this in much more detail. There is nothing, and this is what I tell them, this is the Christian Bible, the New Testament of Jesus Christ. This is all there is to it. I also speak in mosques, and I show this to them. And I say, this is all there is. You can read it in a couple of nights. And there's nothing in here that allows any Christian to kill a child 10,000 miles away because you happen to think his leader is bad. There's nothing in our Bible that allows Christians to do that. Maybe politicians think they can do that, you see. Maybe the Bush families think they can do that. But why do Christian leaders think they can do it? Why do they think they can support a war that is killing little children every day by sanctions in Iraq and in Afghanistan and other places? I'm not a pacifist. I served twice. I was recalled in the Berlin crisis. I know what it's like to go, leave things behind, and have to make it up when you come back. I know that that's the case. But I never believed that some country that had only 20 million people and a gross national product of $500 or $600 per capita and no weapons really capable of even hitting Israel, say nothing about America, is a danger to us. I would have never volunteered for that kind of a war. I would have had to been drugged. Now, we have an all-volunteer army, and not all of them are anxious to go. But what about the leaders of the Christian churches? What about the so-called Christian churches, 100 million strong, that Falwell and Robertson and the Southern Baptist Convention say are absolutely behind the president no matter what? That's what they say. Absolutely! Totally behind him. Boom! Why? The reason is that the same money powers that went after the Federal Reserve Bank in 1913 and have ground us into a wartime posture where we fight all the time, the same money powers saw to it that they started to infiltrate the evangelical Christian churches at the turn of the century, at the very time when the Zionist movement was just starting. It was mentioned today, the first Zionist convention in 1894. Theodor Herzl wrote a book. I don't have it with me, but we sell it. The little book talks about Zionism, creating the state of Israel, and so on. A few years later, it is, and I want to make sure that I explain this. I cannot prove this, but there's extremely strong evidence that it was the Zionist movement that financed a man named Cyrus Schofield. Cyrus Schofield was a forger. He was a professional forger. He was caught enough times, so he finally got convicted. He wasn't caught when he forged his sold forged documents to his mother-in-law and took all her money. The family let him get away with it, but somebody else who was not a member of the family got him, and he served time. He was also deserted his wife, a very unchristian thing to do in that age. In that age, if you were a pastor, you were supposed to stick with your wife. Cyrus Schofield deserted his wife, 2 children, moved to Texas, became a pastor, and then mysteriously got support, and he started to write a Zionist Bible. The New Zionist Bible, you might as well call it. It basically created the state of Israel. And this was in 1908. In 1908, Cyrus Schofield completed the first version of this Bible. It was published by Oxford University Press. Oxford University Press was very prestigious, atheistic, you might say, secular publishing house. At that time, they had never, ever published a book that was produced by and authored by a convicted forger. In fact, they had never even published a book that was ever written by an American. The first American to ever write a book that was published by Oxford University Press was this renegade named Cyrus Schofield. And it's fitting and proper that a forger would forge the Bible, because what he did is he took a vast stack of yellow pages, this is all in his biography, and on these yellow sheets, sitting in Lake Geneva, Switzerland, living there for 4 years with no means of support that anybody could tell, he hand-wrote the notes to the Bible that created the state of Israel in the minds of Christians, and it created the idea that Israel had to be worshipped as a god by Christians who were followers. The Schofield Study Bible, when it came out, this is one. Looks just like every other Bible. The Schofield Study Bible became a bestseller. But more than a bestseller, it became the Bible that was used in seminaries, because you see, the Zionist movement is very good at thinking generationally. And back when Theodor Herzl in 1894 was thinking of creating a state of Israel, they hadn't even got around to the Balfour generation yet. He was dead before Balfour wrote the Declaration. You see, it took 2 generations before there was a state of Israel. But Herzl was thinking for that. And it's the same thing happens here. When this man, Schofield, died, guess who ended up owning his Bible? Oxford University Press. Not his heirs, not his family. The copyrights all the time were owned by Oxford Press. And so they just went on publishing new ones. And each new one still says, edited by Cyrus I. Scofield. The dead guy, died in 1918. He edited the first edition, which was a 1918 edition. And since then, Oxford has gone ahead and republished it every few years, and the latest one, the big change took place in 1967. That's the one I have here, 1967. 1967 was 12 years after the State of Israel was created by the United Nations. 12 years? 67? No, 20. It was 14 years. Anyway, I'm going to read you a couple of notes. Now, why does Ariel Sharon think that he is entitled to the Palestinians' land? Well, he says he's entitled because the Pope told him, whispered in his ear, that the Israelis are entitled to it. Now, we don't know if the Pope really did that, but he says that in a jocular fashion. That's a joke at him. That's a way that he jokes about religion. But what people over there will tell you is, we own it because God gave it to us. And then you say to them, as you're riding on the bus together, oh, where? And they say, it's right in your Bible. And I say, my Bible? And I say, no, my Bible is this. This is the Christian Bible. It's not in there. And they say, no, it's in Genesis. Don't you have Genesis? I say, yes, I know about Genesis. So then they'll tell you, go to Genesis 12, and it's right there. So here's what it says. This is what they say, how they say they got the land. And the Lord said to Abram, get out of thy country and from your family and from your father's house into the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless those who make thy name great. And I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and thou shalt be blessed, and I will bless them who bless you, and curse them who curse you, and in ye shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So that's what it says thousands of years ago, 4,000 years ago in the Bible, and that's the claim on which Israel says they own the land. Because God made a statement to a man named Abram that he would show him a new land, and that land would be his for his and his posterity, and that God would bless those who blessed him and curse those that curse him. Now, I'd like those of you who don't read the Bible and don't believe that you want to read the Bible, I want you to think about this as though it was a last will and testament, a legal document. And you went into your lawyer's office and you said, I really think that I have a right to a piece of John Paul Getty's estate, because at one time he wrote a letter to my great-great-great-great-grandfather, and he said, I'm wishing you my very best. Well, how far do you think you'd get? You see? Not too long ago, John Paul Getty's estate was the subject of huge fraud. There were lawyers going all over the country telling people that they could connect them to his estate, and that their family somehow was entitled to a piece of it, and it even made a family I knew. And then, of course, there was the request for money, and people would be asked to pay the legal fees to do the research and everything, so that it could be proven that you had a right to this John Paul Getty estate. Well, this little passage here, given by a God to somebody who has some kin somewhere, we presume, can no more be proven by Ariel Sharon than I can prove that I was John Paul Getty's heir. And so it is this that this is this basis. Now I want to read you what the Scofield Bible has done to make this the law, and this is where we'll stop. This is the interpretation written by Scofield and then updated in the footnotes. It says, and God made an unconditional promise of blessing through Abram's seed to the nation of Israel to inherit a specific piece of territory forever. Okay? Did you hear that in those words I just read? God made an unconditional blessing through Abram's seed to the nation of Israel to inherit a specific piece of property forever. Well, there was no nation of Israel at the time that was written. You see, this note was written after the state of Israel was created, and then Oxford Press just updated the Bible and put that in. Now there's a state of Israel, so then they put the state of Israel in the footnotes of the Bible. This is the Bible used by the leaders of the Baptist churches. This is the Bible used in most of the seminaries. It is Bibles like this or just like it that do it. And then finally, this is the one that is really amazing. If you don't believe that, you are going to be damned. Here's what it says. For a nation to commit the sin of anti-Semitism brings inevitable judgment. The future will still more remarkably prove this principle. So this says that it's a sin, you see, to be against the state of Israel. And it goes on to mention the state of Israel later. And it says that if you live in a country that does not properly bless the state of Israel, then your country is going to be punished. And it even makes a prophecy. It says, in the past this has happened, in the future it's going to be even more remarkably proven. Now, this is the basis upon which these pastors stand by Israel at any cost, and it's the reason that we go out, and you can go to our website and look at how we do it and what we do. And we now have groups springing up all over. There have been, there's one getting ready to go in San Diego at the Billy Graham Crusade, which will come off in May. There's another one in Los Angeles City, the city of Los Angeles. And we heard of a group that started, patterned after us, one of the people we communicate with, who started one of these in New Zealand. And there was even a march at the churches, a twilight march at the churches in London, going before the pastors and saying to them, what is your position? And I know that I'm out of time, but you need to understand this. When a pastor looks at this, choose life. Most of these churches are pro-life. They believe in the rights of the unborn child. No abortion. They believe in the rights of the unborn child. But when they read the part about no war, choose life, not war, then they realize that they are riding both sides of the horse. They're for the unborn child's life, but they have no concern about the life of the born children in the countries that we're dropping bombs on. And this is a paralyzer to the churches, and it's a challenge to them that they really have a lot of trouble with. And we think that this is the movement that's needed, because if you want to get back your country, you need to get back those 100,000 good, decent, honorable people who go to church every Sunday and who believe in God and honestly believe in the rights of the individual, and who have many of the same principles that you have, but who have been fed this trash, this absolute piece of anti-Arab, anti-Islamic, racist garbage, that there's a superior race that is entitled to everything, and that means every other race is entitled to nothing. That's really where it comes down to. That's the question that must be faced by our Christian leaders, and we're going to take it right to them, and we're going to keep on doing it, and this is going to go everywhere. Thank you.